And tonight we have Dominic DiFranzo. You may remember Dominic was going to join us in September and ran into technical difficulties, so we're delighted that he could come back to be with us tonight. Dominic is an assistant professor at Lehigh in computer science and engineering, and he's done really fascinating research on basically how to elicit our better selves in social media interactions, and something that seems to be in increasing demand, unfortunately, every year. So really looking forward to hearing that. So I will turn it over to Dominic now.
Great. So I want to thank all of you for coming and allowing me to chat here today. It's always a pleasure to hear other practitioners and researchers and people in our CHI community. What I want to talk a little bit about today was about some of the work I've been doing in social media design and empathy, and some of the studies we've done and some of the results we got from that, and then where we see some of the future stuff of that possibly moving. This is geared a little bit more towards research and things in that, but I'm more than happy to answer any other type of questions on more practical things, on more theoretical stuff, on where things are going as well. You know, I'm happy to take any questions, ideas, comments, discussions around that as well. A little bit about myself. Wendy did a great introduction of me already. Currently I'm an assistant professor at Lehigh University in the Department of Computer Science and Engineering. Before that, I was at Cornell as a postdoc in the social media lab and the research and groups lab. So a lot of my work focuses on the social design of the media platforms that we're on. And also I've done, quite a number of work on human robotic interaction. How do humans and robots interact with one another? How are they social? How do they work inside groups? Et cetera, et cetera. I've built a number of experiments with that, which if you ever end up actually doing, like, don't ever, if you can ever avoid using actual real robots in anything in your everyday life outside of like maybe a Roomba, yeah, just don't. It's a total pain and just awfulness. I don't know how people do it. But away from the toxic, awful robots I've had in my previous life, what I want to talk about is just like the absolute garbage fire that is social media. This is like my evergreen slide. I pretty much always use the slide because it's always terrible and shitty. They're like, oh, do you remember when social media was bad? It's like, no, it's always been pretty crappy. I don't even tell you about this, and it's coming from fake accounts, it's coming from real accounts, it's coming from your grandma, it's coming from the president of the United States, you know what I mean? It's coming from, all over the world, stuff like that. Both, misinformation, disinformation, cyber aggression, witch hunts, cyberbullying, stuff like that. It's just it's a difficult, not fun place to be a part of. And one of the things I'm looking around, one of my hypotheses and things I've been looking at in terms of why this kind of stuff comes from social media, constantly brings me back to the design of social media itself. You know what I mean? Like, how is it that we build and design? It's not by accident. It didn't just fall out of the sky. This was, social media platforms are engineered for a certain thing. But what is that thing that they're being engineered for? Primarily, that's really centered around engagement. You know what I mean? The designers around social media platforms are doing it because the financial incentive for these companies, and these are mainly for-profit companies, is to get people to interact on the platform more and more likes, more clicks, more shares, et cetera. And we see this even in how platforms change their design. And in this example here, we see, a platform of both YouTube and Netflix moving away from a 5-star rating of videos and other things like that to simply an up or down vote. Why did they do this? Why did they ask less data of their users? You think that'd be less useful for what they would want. But it's not the point. They know from a design perspective that the less they ask of their user, instead of having to choose 1 through 5 and to rate the thing, if you just say yes or no, that's easier for someone to do, and you're more likely to get interactions, even if the data maybe isn't as good, or you're not getting as much of it as before. The designs and redesigns of these platforms is everything. They're trying to simplify and centered around, capturing more and more interaction, even if it's to dumb down or to scale down that level of interaction, just to encourage more of it. When we look at like, we look at like Twitter, so like a classic example of this, the design around this isn't an accident. What, if you look at this and try to read this from a design perspective, what is being privileged, in this design and stuff like that. When you right at the top, we have a question being posed to me, what's happening? Twitter's literally posing a question, wanting me to interact with it, to tell it, with this writing prompt, what's going on, what's happening, what does it contribute something through? Even with all the posts, every single message and post that's centered around this has interaction buttons in the order of preference they want those type of interactions. If I see something new, oh, maybe I could reply to it. The reply button is first below every post, because that's the most useful thing. If I'm not going to make my own, comment, unprompted, maybe I'll comment or reply to a post that already exists. Well, if I'm not going to reply, maybe you could retweet it. That's still sending something out to your network as a whole. It's sharing something around that. Well, if you're not going to share it, at the very least, maybe you could like it. That's still something. That's still a signal to Twitter, to your followers, to other things about what you're thinking. It's still some type of engagement, even though it's not the type of is all the engagement they want from you. But the thing around this is that none of this is built around privileging certain types of good or bad behavior. When we start thinking about the designing of the platforms, it's only centered around user engagement. Everything is focused on that one goal. But cyberbullying, cyber aggression, misinformation, fake news, all these things, that's user engagement. That's users using the platform as it was intended, and there's nothing in there to stop or limit or do anything from the design perspective. So the main thrust of my research is really looking at, could we rethink this? Is there a way to rethink the design goals of social media and rebuild or re-platform or re-architect these type of systems to encourage more pro-social types of behaviors, to be more empathetic with one another, to be more discerning of the information that we read and share and post on media platforms, to help out when we see that others are in distress? Could we actually use the same design concepts and ideas with a different goal, and that goal being to encourage those pro-social actions? And so some of my work, my earliest work in this area is really focused around cyberbullying. Cyberbullying isn't just kids, playing in backyards, yelling, silly things to one another, or just, silly, playground behavior. It's a serious, public health challenge. People literally die or get hurt or get mentally scarred because of these type of interactions and the type of things. We've seen countless stories of these type of happening. And we don't really understand enough about how or why this happens, let alone even how to address it or how to meet this challenge. It's still very poorly understood. One of the things we do know that can help in instances of cyberbullying, though, is the idea of bystander intervention. When outsiders viewing an instance of cyberbullying reach out and help, they defend the victim, they try to stop the aggression or reduce those effects, that can have a great process and a great effect on helping the victims and kind of stopping that victimization process that someone might be going through when they're being faced with cyberbullying. And when we talk about that in the context of the studies and other things around it, we're being very broad with our definition of bystander intervention. I'm saying anything from flagging bad comments to liking a victim's posts or giving them some type of emotional support, replying, and directly interacting or injecting yourself into situations, or even blocking or silencing aggressive people and other things like that, or bringing these type of accounts to the attention of the platform's admins. But the bad news is even though we know that bystander intervention is very helpful in these instances of cyberbullying, most people don't do it. From Pew Internet Research, we know that less than 30% of Americans have reported having to act as an upstander when they've witnessed some type of form of online harassment. So most people, when they see something like that happening, they do what a lot of other people do. They just scroll on by. They pretend they didn't see it. They just go on. They don't get involved. It's not their problem, not their worry, whatever, And why is that though? Why, well, we see these distressing things, things could go through with that. Why do so many people choose to ignore that and just go on by? One of the reasons of what we know around this are some of the things we've been postulated and shown in other studies is the idea of the bystander effect. I don't know how much you remember from your Psych 101 days, but the bystander effect is a well-known psychological model discovered around in the 70s that postulates and shows that the more people witnessing a threatening event, the more bystanders are, the less likely any individual person is likely to intervene and help out, which seems kind of paradoxical. You think if there's a giant crowd of bystanders, it's more likely someone's going to help out. But that's not the case. You're much more likely to get help if it was just you in a back road in the middle of nowhere, and there's just one person seen as that person's much more likely to help you than if they were inside of a crowd. One of the reasons for this, and one of the key factors of the bystander effect of why this happens, is the idea of this diffusement of the sense of responsibility. And then we see this both in offline and in online interactions and things with it. What we mean by that is that when you're in a group of lots of other people witnessing a bad event, the responsibility to act is diffused across the entire group. You feel less responsible because everyone takes a little bit of that responsibility. It's not really your job to get involved. It could be Joe, it could be this other guy, it could be this other stranger. They might get involved, they might do something. But if you're the only person there, if there's not a crowd, if it's just you seeing this emergency event, now all the responsibility is on you. It's not diffused out between all that crowd, it's all on you. And that greater sense of responsibility makes you much more likely to interact and intervene and help out in some way. So I've ran a couple of studies looking at this in the online context of trying to understand how is it that we can make people feel more responsible or more guilty, basically, for the things they see and do online. And we've got this idea around public surveillance, knowing that other people are watching you, can see what you do, and aware of the actions, and that you're being seen by others. That's the other key part. We know that this effect increases our sense of accountability for our behaviors and actually increases pro-social actions by actually, not so much big brother, but big crowd or big siblings watching you. More likely for you to feel more accountable and act a little more pro-socially because people are seeing what you're doing. I'm not going to get into great detail about these experiments because this is really outside the scope of empathy, but I just wanted to briefly mention some of our experiments in this idea of public surveillance and being seen. This is kind of another pro-social way of trying to get people to feel like they're seen by others. So we ran an experiment, with a social media site where every time you read any post in your newsfeed, a little overlay would go over it telling you that you've read this. This is something that you've already seen, or you've just seen this. And if you load it again, it'll tell you that you've already seen it before. This kind of gives you a bit of a visual cue of that the system is watching you, that it's kind of reminding you that like the platform itself knows what it is that you've done, that is watching you and it knows that you read this and is telling you that it knows that you read this. But not just one of the system. You want to see, the public surveillance doesn't really work if the system's watching. You kind of already think that anyway. But what about other people? The crowd, the other, people in this network. What do they know? So we also had another experiment where, as well as getting that system notification, we'd also let you know what the audience was as well. Every time another person read through one of your posts, you would get a little notification saying, oh, Joe read your post. They saw it, And every time you read posts, you would be, in a sense, sending a signal to that person saying that you've read that post. And so there's this bi-directional informational exchange of actually reading each other's posts. Made it impossible to lurk on the site anymore. You can't just, unobtrusively read things. The act of reading itself is an act of contribution almost. It's sending a signal out to the network. All the people that have read your post and all the posts that you read, you're notifying the people, the creators of those posts every time you read something. And so there's this type of surveillance, this type of thing that other people can see what I'm doing and I can see what other people are doing, made people feel a lot more responsible for what they did and for the things going through and stuff like that, and actually end up being fairly successful. Again, the point of this talk really isn't so much talking about that study, just introducing this concept of pro-social design. I'm happy to talk about it more, but in our original study, we showed that those effects on themselves would increase people's sense of public surveillance, that would increase that an increased sense of public surveillance would increase your sense of accountability. Increased sense of accountability led to increased sense of responsibility. And those who felt more responsible were more likely to intervene or help out when they saw cyberbullying. But one of the things we looked at, so we showed that this, some of our previous work and other things that looked at this, social surveillance, other things like that, but it's kind of creepy. One of the things we always got from people is that like, no one wants to be on a site where everyone can see what you're doing and you can see what everyone else is doing. Like, it just seems kind of weird. And if that was the case, you kind of wouldn't want to really use it in the real world. And, how, scalable would that really be? And there's other kind of issues around that. And so we want to figure, are there other pathways? Are there other ways of looking around, getting through to bystander intervention, you know what I mean? And helping out with this. And so we know that, in terms of bystander inaction, so not doing something, is also linked to a failure to empathize. And we have a lot of studies kind of showing that. So this idea of like empathy might be another key. That might be another pathway around to getting bystanders to become upstanders, that they're not empathizing with others. We know worryingly still that empathy is on the decrease. From studies done on college freshmen since 1979 has shown a steady decline in empathy since 2009 and onwards and stuff like that. Like we've seen like a steady decline, or not just since 2009, but since they've started the study in 79, this decrease in the sense of empathy. And so before I kind of get into ways of designing around empathy, I think we need to be a little more clear about what exactly is empathy, and is it even something that can be changed? A lot of people think empathy is very much of an innate trait and stuff like that. And we're gonna jump into that. So what is empathy when we say that? What's the concept around it? Zaki is probably one of the biggest researchers in empathetic methods and systems. Describes it as the sharing and understanding of affective states of another person. So simply put, it's the ability to be able to understand someone else's emotions and be able to share and have that sense of sharing with them, that you can feel someone else's pain, you can feel someone else's happiness, you can understand their emotional state. And you could see that, you can see and feel what that thing's going through, and kind of be in that like person's shoes. And kind of have that ability for it. We know that empathy is both a personality trait. So it is a personality trait. There are some people that are predisposed to be more empathetic than others. There are those that have very low levels of empathy or almost no levels of empathy. Those with certain mental disorders or mental challenges and conditions might have a lack of empathy or the inability to empathize with others, or there might be more other people that have very high levels of empathy and are very likely to feel empathetic to others. But not only is it a personality trait, it's also a malleable, momentary, other-oriented response. Basically means that you can feel times where you're more empathetic, and there can be times when you're not. It's like in a moment, sense and stuff like that of feeling empathy for others and not. It's like when you watch a movie and you feel really empathetic for the character you're watching on screen, even though it's not real. Those aren't even real emotions. That's not a real situation. In that moment of watching something and so that you're experiencing and feeling the emotions of those characters on your TV. Or you can feel a very lack of empathy for other people, like in the before COVID, when you could go inside restaurants and be served. You might not feel a lot of empathy for your server. You don't really even kind of think of them as being a person or anything like that. You don't even probably remember their name half the time, it's something that intellectually, you mean that they're a person, now they're feeling and they have thoughts and feelings and emotions, something like that. But in that moment, if you being in a restaurant, it never really even occurs to you. It's something that's just in the background, and so this, kind of flow and changes depending on a lot of different factors. And that is what we want to get into with our design, that more momentary, other-oriented response. What are the factors that could lead to, increase or decrease of empathy? And can we use that to encourage it on a social media platform? So one of the key ones we know about to feel empathetic for other people is at the first and foremost, they have to be identifiable. I mean, when we're talking about a victim for cyberbullying, we know that we can increase levels of empathy when that victim is identifiable. When we say that, Jamal was, the victim of a cyberbullying, attack, rather than just some people or a person was an attack. It's much more easier to empathize with Jamal than it is with some people. That could be anyone. That could be nothing. That could be whatever. There's nothing around that. As well and stuff like that. So if we're thinking about ways of increasing or leading to more empathy, identifiability is key. We've got to remind people and key them and prime them that this isn't just cool guy 35 that's just a Russian bot or something like that. This is a real person. They have a face, they have a family, they have emotions, they have a real name, etc. By increasing those levels of identifiability and personhood helps us empathize, or it's the first gateway, the first thing necessary for us to really empathize with that person. Likewise, there's other types of experiments that have shown even just a small feeling prompt, that alone can encourage you and prime you to be more empathetic. And one of the classic studies, and Batson, he's done a lot of different studies, literally just having a prompt, a question saying, imagine how this person feels and how it's affected their life. By just having that prompt, by just raising that question of what it's like to feel for someone else, you trying to imagine that will in its own actually increase your levels of empathy. You'll actually start thinking about that and start feeling more empathetic for that person, rather than if you had a prompt that says, describe what happened, very matter-of-factly, you know what I mean? Kind of just, what happened in the situation, rather like, imagine what it felt like to be in that situation, stuff like that. Just that change in language alone can have a detectable and a change, detectable change in our empathetic response in these situations. And so we start kind of using those as kind of the basis for our design around this. One of those is having an identifiable victim. Maybe able to instantly show who this person is and encouraging you to write to that person by saying, you should really write to Cassie. The green thing isn't actually going to be the overlay on the thing. This is for purposes of the slide to kind of further accent that. In fact, if you look at the photo itself, you notice inside the little comment box inside of there, instead of, we'd say like write a comment, it says like literally write to Cassie. We identify that you're not just writing a prompt or just writing a comment, you're going to be writing to Cassie. We actually name her. This is her post, this is her thing, and she's being bullied by Emma, who's being very mean. And this is, kind of telling you for that. So it's kind of the one thing of being identifiable and naming that person. But this idea of also the feeling prompt. Remember this idea of just asking you to feel for another person. We see this thing at the top here of how is Cassie feeling? It's kind of like a small prompt above the comment box that's asking you, how is she feeling? What might be going through her, in this moment? And that's, kind of another thing. So we had kind of this two-part design, which one of these might actually work, or other things going through that. So we did a small study as kind of a way of kind of thinking, would any of this actually work at all? And if so, is it the combination of it? Is it one or the other? Like, where is this have any effect on these type of things? So we did a 2x2 experimental design, just a quick survey of people looking through a bunch of media posts, screenshots of posts like that, and having them, kind of explore the things. So we had, our control group, just the feeling prompt, just the identity, prompt of like write to Cassie, and then with both of them together. And so those are the four, experimental groups in our experiment. And then we measured empathy for the victim, for Cassie, you know what I mean? And like, what did you feel for these different words, sympathetic, soft-hearted, warm, compassionate, and tender, moved, and you'd rate from 1 to 7 how you feel. Do you feel that way towards Kathy? You know what I mean? Or not Cassie, sorry, not Kathy, Cassie. From 1 to 7, 1 being not at all, 7 being extremely. This is a very standard metric for measuring empathy. It's used in, it's kind of the gold standard used in all these empathetic studies of measuring, empathetic response to things. We kind of grabbed this from the same Batson et al. Study. So we found the result of our analysis of that showed that the feeling prompt alone it was the only one that really had a statistical significant difference increase in empathy. So we see our control, our identification, the interaction between the two, not a lot of effect. The fact it's not even that significantly different, statistically different than the control group. It was really the prompt by itself, which was kind of surprising. I was kind of really rooting for the interaction. The prompt itself, that actually led to a good increase to levels of empathy. People felt more empathetic for Cassie, the victim of the cyberbullying attacks and other things in a screenshot survey. So that's kind of interesting. There's some cool things about that. The feeling prompt, definitely worked and did good things. But here's this thing, what we're missing here is the scale of social media. Yeah, it's all well and good that you went on a survey and you read a couple of screenshots and you felt some empathy for this fake Cassie person that is fake and it's not a real site. And it's in a survey that you're getting paid 25 cents to do. And what does that really mean? What is it really going through inside of there? It might work in that instance, but would it work in a real social media environment? And more importantly, social media is about scale. It's not just watching Cassie, it's watching hundreds, maybe even thousands of other people, whether it's on Reddit or Facebook or Twitter or what have you. Could this still work? Could it scale up to the level of social media? So to do this, we couldn't just run another survey and do other things with it. That wasn't enough. We had to really kind of put this into a real social networking site. The problem being is though that I'm not Mark Zuckerberg and I don't own Facebook. I'm also not a robot. I don't own Twitter, sadly, and I don't, can't control or put experiments on these platforms. So I did the next best thing. I built my own social networking site called Eat, Snap, Love. It's a real site. You can go to it right now. It works on your computer, laptops, phones, everything. It has all the same features and love from like Instagram and Facebook and Twitter. It looks and feels very similar to that. We tell participants and others about it that it's it's kind of a social media site for sharing food selfies, hence the name, Eat, Snap, Love. It's kind of a cross between Twitter and like Instagram. But that wasn't enough. So we have this experimental platform, we have the social networking site, and now I have this place where I can, actually put my experiments on. I could try this design on Eat, Snap, Love, and I can see, some people get this intervention, some people don't. I get to see what happens. All these people interact with one another, et cetera, et cetera. But that's not enough, really. A key, factor around, empathy and cyberbullying and these other things around that, it's not just enough to control the interface of that. I need to have some control over the social interactions that take place on social media. All these things are very socially contextual, you know what I mean? And not only that, when I'm running an experiment, it could be that the 5 or the 50 or the 100 group of people that I'm working with, a few people in there might just be very empathetic. And because they're empathetic and they jump on to helping the victim right away, that could cause a bandwagon effect of causing other people to help out and see this and do other things as well. It could introduce more noise into my data. And I couldn't really conclusively say that the changes in behavior that I see on my site is only due to the interactions and the interface that I built and designed. It could be for the people that were on it. It could be for the type of interactions they're having. It could be that maybe there was no cyberbullying took place. Maybe everyone's being like way too nice to one another. I needed to like construct these type of situations. So what I needed to do was create a space where I could construct different social situations, but have people believe that they were genuine and real, and see how they react to those when they believe that this is a genuine situation. So what I did is I built a system called the Truman Platform, named after the Truman Show, the 1998 film. Referencing, if you haven't seen it, it's a Jim Carrey movie where Truman's a young man who his entire world is fake. He's inside of a reality show and he doesn't know it, and his whole world is a constructed show around him. And so much in the same way, I constructed a platform system where participants join my site and they don't know any better. It's a social simulation. I simulate the social interactions and things around inside this platform. So for example, a participant joins my site. I tell them, they're beta testers for this new cool app, to play with it for a few days and do other things. And they interact with it in all the ways they would normally interact in social media. They post pictures, they like things, they make comments, et cetera, et cetera. And when they post pictures, they get likes and they get, comments and other fun stuff like that. But what the participants don't know is that everything they see, everything they read, everyone they interact with is fake. They're all a series of bots controlled by me and the research team. They are the only real person on the social networking site. In fact, they're not on a social networking site. They're completely alone in the social networking site, interacting with bots, playing complex parts and roles and acting as these various different users. And this allows me to construct really complex interactions and interventions and situations around us. Every time anyone does anything on the site, the bots are smart. They know how to interact back to the participant. They view the person's posts. They like things. They'll comment back to them, etc. But again, they're all just bots. They're not real people. Our participant is completely alone in this social media simulation. And they're completely encapsulated by it. There's no way for them to ever interact with a real person once they're inside the site. They never interact with any of the other real participants. Every participant is in their own bubble, version of Eat, Snap, Love. Not only that, everything that they do on Eat, Snap, Love is being watched and monitored by me and the research team. Every time they click on a button, every window they go to, every time they scroll, how long they look at certain things, all that's being recorded and analyzed for our research purposes. So I know exactly what our people are actually doing. I can capture not just their intentions, what they said they would do, but I can capture what it was that they actually did. And so this is what the Truman platform basically is. It's an open source, it's freely available. Anyone can fork this on GitHub. It's used in a bunch of other research studies that we've used. And then not only that, it helps manage large, complex social media apps for, what is that noise? Do you hear, that must just be me, maybe something in the house, I'm sorry.
Smoke detector?
Maybe, I guess, yeah. So hopefully it's not a fire going off, right? That's like the last thing I need, right? It helps manage these large scale online social experiments. It does all the work for you. Basically having Truman, once you set it up correctly, you point participants to it, and it runs the study for you, collects all the data, and it gets it for you to analyze. And allows us to also completely replicate all of our experiments. All the experiments I talked about today, and anything that's ever used in Truman, is easy to replicate. You can replicate any of my studies. You go to the Git repo that holds the information for that simulation and turn it on, point people to it, and you can recreate my study just like I did and verify and check my results. So the basic study design, we ask participants, we give them a pre-survey asking a bunch of demographic questions about who you are, what type of things you like. We capture things like Big Ocean, which is like the basic personality metrics and stuff like that for parts of our personality. Things on their levels of empathy, normal, their experience in being in social media, their experience in cyberbullying, et cetera, et cetera. We tell the participants that they're going to be beta testers for Eat, Snap, Love, a new hot young app coming out of Silicon Valley that's going to be launching in the next few months. And they're here to test things out and give out their feedback on how much they like using it and what improvements we could possibly make to make it more enjoyable. They play in the site for 3 days where they interact and see a bunch of posts. They like things, they make their own posts, they do other things with that. But again, they're the only real person. Amongst in those 3 days, is a situation is different cyberbullying situations. Every day they're guaranteed to see one cyberbullying interaction, maybe between Cassie, who's our victim, and Emma, who is our bully. And it's always the same two, though it's different posts for them, but it's always the same victim and the same perpetrator. And then at the end of that, we collect a post survey, collecting a bunch of other metrics of their intentions, their mental state, their things that they noticed. Manipulation checks, did they realize this was real? Did they realize it was fake? Things like that. And we compare that and analyze it with our behavioral data. So we actually capture all the things they did on the site, and then we go that against all their mental states and other metrics and stuff that we have in our post survey analysis. So we also had a 2x2 study design. where all the posts would have nothing to just be regular social media site, nothing else special with it. We'd have, we wanted to combine this to see between empathy and social surveillance, which one would work, which one wouldn't. Would they be different things? Would they both help with bystander intervention? Would they be likely to help others intervene when they see these types of bullying take place? So we had, again, we've notified Cassie, our public surveillance thing we had from our previous studies. And then we had that mixed also with our feeling prompt to elicit senses of empathy for others. And then we crossed those, the interaction between the two, to see which one of these would increase senses of responsibility to, or which one would lead to more intervention of helping out in these cyberbullying situations. And would they follow different pathways? We have like a very clear pathway in the social surveillance work, from going to public surveillance to accountability to responsibility to intervention. Would empathy follow a different path? Would there be different things around with that for empathetic concern? In the case with that, the only difference in the entire experiment was those interface needs. The simulation, the cyberbullying they saw, all that was completely identical. There was no variation in the social situation that they were presented with. Everyone saw the same posts, the same actors, the same situations, the same bullying. The only difference was that change in design. And so it helps if we see any change in behavior, we can be more conclusive that it was caused by this change in the interface itself. That this was the thing responsible for that. So we had a couple questions and measures, or in our talk, are dependent variables, in our experiment. One of them, of course, was empathy. A simple prompt of on each step love, I felt very sorry for people who were treated unfairly. 1, strongly disagree. 7, strongly agree. So capturing kind of empathy for others on the site. Social transparency. I know that other people have seen my posts, and I know, who's looking at my posts. I know people can see me. Self-presentation concerns. So how concerned are you about the way you present it to others? So, while using step love, how important was it for you to convey a desirable impression? That's another metric that we had about whether they were concerned with how they were viewed by others on each step love. Accountability. So I was held accountable for my behavior in each step love, 1 through 7. That was just an example of one of our accountability questions. All of these had multiple measures to them. This is just an example of one of the prompts to measure this dependent variable. And then lastly, we had our actual behavioral intervention, or our behavioral dependent variable, bystander intervention. When you saw an instance of cyberbullying, did you intervene at all? Did you and help any of the posts of the victim? Did you try to flag the bullying message? Did you try to reach out to Cassie? Did you try to reach out to the bully? Did you, try to intervene in any way and stuff like that inside of these situations? So interestingly enough, of all our participants across all experimental conditions, 58.6% of bystanders intervened to at least one instance of cyberbullying of the 3 that they saw throughout the 3-day experiment. Of that, the vast majority of those came in a view of likes, of those having some type of like or support for the victim of that post. So when you saw that Cassie was being victimized, you were more likely to like her post and intervene and help out and let her know that you are giving her some type of emotional support. 26.4% flagged the bullying comment or the bullying information to Cassie, and 12.6% commented in some way and intervened and jumped into the situation to either encourage Cassie or to discourage Emma, the bully. Of that, did any of our things have any increase in empathy or control or transparency, feeling prompt, the interactions together? And the answer is no, no difference. So our no difference from control. Our feeling prompt, which worked in our previous study, it worked in our survey and did increase levels of empathy in our original survey and in our original study. When we scale it to the level of the social network on Eat Snap Love to hundreds of users against multiple days, believing this is a real situation, Did not increase empathy. Giant failure. Did not work whatsoever. We did increase levels of accountability and empathy for those who we had an indirect effect on accountability to interaction to flagging, the victim post. So if you felt accountable for your actions, regardless of how that happened, if you felt accountable, you were more likely to flag those bullying posts. If you felt empathy, so our empathy prompt didn't make you feel more empathetic, but if you were already feeling empathetic, you were more likely to indirectly, there was an indirect effect of flagging the bullying post. Likewise, if you felt accountable, there was an indirect effect to liking the bullying, or not liking the bullying post, that'd be terrible, liking the victim's post. And if you felt empathetic, that was a direct effect. You had a direct relationship or direct effect to liking the victim's posts and helping out in some emotional support ways. So empathy nudges does not scale. It worked in the small thing. It does not work in this larger thing. And there's actually a lot of reasons around this. It is something that we kind of already knew, but hoping it wasn't going to take place, I guess, or hoping that we could get around it. And this idea that we know from a lot of previous research that empathy doesn't scale. You can empathize with a single person. You can empathize with, with a Pixar movie, you know what I mean? Or with a ball called Wilson, then you're stranded on an island. Even with that, you can empathize with, but you can't empathize with thousands or hundreds of people. You hear about, a single person being sick and dying and stuff like that, and that's a tragedy. But, almost 3,000 people die a day of COVID-19. And yeah, it sounds like a lot. It's hard for me to empathize and understand 3,000 people dying every single day. Like, I just can't, our brains aren't wired to understand, empathize, things at a level. In fact, we even know from even neurologically, we have difficulties with this. You're coaching upon the Dunbar number, which sociologists and neuropsychology, kind of looked at primate brains and the number of people we can cognize mentally as individualized humans. It's around 100 to 150. And once you get beyond that, it's hard to empathize with more people than that. It's it's getting close to the limits, the neurological limits of our empathy, and how many people we can simultaneously kind of empathize around with. And we were definitely way over that. And so it does not scale to the level of a social network. Other things, it kind of explains a lot of the problems and issues and things that we have because of this. There are some strategies and things even around this and the scalability of things, having systems that understand when a threatening situation might take place and having a just-in-time empathy prompt or just-in-time, situation to prompt you to feel for something in that moment. You know what I mean? But having that, asking you to feel empathy for everyone all at the same time just makes you turn off your empathy. You just can't handle it. You overload on it real quick. There's even other studies that show that when we have a choice to feel empathetic for someone or to be more objective, we very often choose to be more objective and look at things from that. When you have the choice to choose empathy or not empathy, we're more likely to not choose empathy because it's the emotional and mental cost associated with that. And it just doesn't scale well. So there's a couple solutions and things around that, but we're really hitting our neurological limits. It's about understanding, where prompts and where things like this could work and where they're not going to. And instead of trying to get empathy to scale, is it more about how do we descale social media? How do we build these things inside of that to not overtax us or to be more useful of the finite resource that is our empathetic energy? And there's some interesting other work that we're looking to as well. We're thinking about kind of the complete redesign or different genres of social media outside of just posts. You think about the news feed and how insane a Facebook news feed is, you know what I mean? And how difficult it is to empathize with that. You're going through a news feed and there's a photo of a puppy from your college, roommate, from, 15 years ago. And the next post is about how 3,000 people died from COVID today. And then the next post is a cute little puppy and how, ruin someone's shoes. The next post is about like, oh my God, there's a climate disaster and all of Australia is on fire and Jesus Christ. And, you're just like this constant back and forth of all these things. You just can't handle that. It's like all mixed up and crazy. And there's constant extreme variation in emotions and ideas and whiplash that we just become numb to everything because it's asking way too much from us and we can't really handle that. Our brains were never meant to have that. There's no like narrative flow or focus in a normal newsfeed. But there's been this interesting feature that we've seen didn't mean to go forward. There's another interesting development we've seen in other social media sites that everyone's kind of using nowadays of like Instagram stories or like Snapchat, where we have these ephemeral moments where you focus on a single person and you're looking through the different posts and things of that person, and it kind of swipes on kind of for you. You had little time moments of looking through this. They're not going to stay there forever, so you better kind of watch it now. And it kind of forces you to kind of focus, to pay attention on kind of one person and a little bit of the interaction things they're going through. And there's some of our research we're doing right now is trying to compare that to a normal news feed. And is there a difference between empathy between that? Are you more likely to feel empathy for people when that information is provided to you in a stories-like interface, where you're focused on a single person, those posts are timed, they're ephemeral, they're not gonna stay there forever, they kind of move on their own a bit. You're not just scrolling on by and just ignoring all the things. It's not all jumbled together, all willy-nilly. So we're working on an experiment right now where the simulation and the posts are exactly the same. All the same content, the same photos, the same people, everything's the same. The only difference is how we're presenting that, whether we present that information, those posts and that simulation through Instagram, something like Instagram stories or something like a traditional newsfeed. And seeing which one of these, is there any difference between these on the level of empathy that we can feel and for that? And if there is, this might give us some clues towards how do we re-engineer social media websites in the future. You know what I mean? That there's nothing written in stone that social media has to be a giant news feed of just scrolling garbage all the time, that there might be other ways to represent this type of social interactions. That might increase more levels of empathy. And this is kind of our step in the way of thinking, what are other genres? What are other completely different formats that social media could take that might take us to other places and other things? So that's all I have for you today. I want to thank all my amazing collaborators at Cornell, at Lehigh, at Stanford, and other areas I've worked with on this platform and this work that I'm so thankful for and could not have done this, had not done this alone, could not have done it alone. And I want to thank you all for listening to me blather about social media garbage and empathy and some of the stuff that I've been working on. And I'm more than happy to stay here as long as you want to answer any questions and to just chat. Thank you again. I hope you guys actually, I thought someone actually posted the link to Eat Snap Love. I hope you find fun doing that. There's actually that experiment that I just talked about at the end of my slides, that's the current running experiment on Eat Snap Love. Don't worry, you can't wreck anything. It's just for testing purposes right now. We haven't actually given it to participants. You're not wrecking our study or anything like that. It might not work super well. There's still a couple bugs we're working out for the latest version. It's still in the testing before we give it to real participants. But feel free to play around with it. You're not going to ruin anything. It's just on the testing side. If you do find an error, if something blows up or seems weird or whatever, do let me know. I could have you unintentionally test my platform for me. That's all the better. But have fun with that. When last time you updated documentation? When I last time I updated on GitHub, not a while ago. We have documentation of using the Truman platform up on a Google Doc, which I need to post, and we're making a more public version of that soon. That's in the wings as we speak. Because we were doing there's been some modifications. There's been some new versions of Truman that are coming out soon, of new features that'll help it be easier to write, create, and share simulations and do things like this. So there's a lot of active development on that. So we're putting some new documentation and building the new Truman website, more publicly talk about it. It's still very much not even a beta. It's like super alpha. I find it, if anyone can make use of it outside of me, all the power to you. I can barely make use of it sometimes. But we are working heavily to try to make a more public, usable version of the treatment platform for other researchers in their studies. Users discouraged, empathy, assistance design, interactions, intrusive prime. With lots of ads. That's an interesting question. Yeah, the effects of surveillance capitalism on empathy can't be positive, I imagine.
Is this the question from Mark? I'm sorry. Is this
question
from Mark?
Yeah, from Mark. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Just so everyone knows what to.
Yeah, that's a really interesting one. I imagine it can't be healthy or good. Knowing that you're being watched and things around it. We did notice that social surveillance, that is that other people, not systems or ads or advertisers or things like that. But I know that other actual normal people are watching what I'm doing. I'm more likely to intervene and help out and be pro-social because I know I'm being watched. You know what I mean? I know the things around that. Although maybe it also causes stress though as well. So it's just like being on top of the stage. Yeah, you're gonna be on your best behavior on a stage in front of a crowd, but it's also quite stressing because you constantly feel like you're being watched because you are, and there's other things with that. So there's this playback of, yeah, you might be more pro-social, you might be doing more nice things, but you're gonna be stressed out by it. And it's not gonna be a place you wanna go and relax and willingly take part in and stuff like that. We did make some arguments in our original paper about that trade-off between the creepiness and pressures of social surveillance and the promise of a more pro-social community that has less garbage and other things on it, and whether users would take that trade-off or have that thing around that. That's something we're still kind of experimenting and playing around with. But from companies and from other perspectives and stuff like that, I would say no. We have done other research on privacy and trustfulness and other stuff like that around third-party advertisements and other things around that. And it's amazing the different strategies people use and engage in to hide their activity or to have some semblance of privacy. They'll lie and be purposely mistruthful on platforms of that to obscure who they really are or what they're really going through, because they still want that social interaction, but they don't want the risks that get involved with that of being doxxed possibly. So yeah, that's really interesting. That's a great question. From Dan, we got a question. Do different social media platforms have different levels of bullying? Instagram, less than Twitter? That's a great question. There's definitely those that have different reputations of cyberbullying, and both from the community itself to how it's being moderated, both by the users and by the admins and creators of the platform, and whether they take those more or less seriously. Instagram has actually been really good about their anti-bullying tactics. They have a corporate, even though they're part of Facebook, and Facebook itself has kind of a garbage reputation, as deserved, for what they allow and do on their platform. Instagram, on the other hand, has worked really hard to try and be a more pro-social platform, or be more upfront and proactive in a lot of these efforts. You know what I mean? So they take bullying way more seriously. They have a lot of content moderators, both paid and unpaid. They have a lot of teams that are focused exclusively on this, and not only that, but like on mental health challenges and things like that. They're very cautious of what they allow users to search for, the type of content that they allow on their platform. They're very diligent about things like that, even down to things like different types of health misinformation, other things like that, or things that might support the pro-ANA movement. Pro-ANA is it's an online community that advocates for anorexia in women and stuff like that, that supports and likes people being anorexic. And they work really hard to try to stop those type of communities from engaging and using Instagram as a platform for that. So they've been pretty good on that. Others are kind of more freewheeling and allow other things like that, purposely so. Reddit, depending on the community and the subreddit, can kind of be all over the place. Reddit's an interesting example. It's much more of a fractured community in terms of its moderator team, who that moderator team is, how that community self-polices itself. It takes a lot for that to get to the level of system admins or the site level admins to actually make any decisions on an individual community. But yeah, a lot of that has to do more with the moderation strategies, the rules that they allow on that, stuff like that. You know what I mean? There's actually a study we're working on right now looking at that more closely around the radicalization process online, how people become radicalized, how something that was unacceptable becomes more acceptable on an online platform, and what different strategies, how those social norms get formed and change over time. So really about the perceptions of social norms and the changing of that. We're looking at that in the context of anti-vax. You know, so like more and more extremist anti-vax types of posts. Do you feel that how do you feel that's okay? And do you feel like that the community is becoming more accepting of that? At what level, what are the different factors in understanding social norms that come through to you, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, that's a great question.
There's another one here on do different social media platforms have different levels of bullying, e.g. Instagram less than Twitter?
Yeah, I was answering around that one before about.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No worries, no worries. I was rambling all over the place, so it's totally fine. But yeah, that's
I actually had an add-on to that. I was wondering if you ever have reached out to any of the social media companies about your research to see if they wanted to be involved in anything, if you've had any responses.
Yeah, somewhat. Like so we did have some interactions with Instagram back in the day, a little bit ago, and that really didn't go anywhere. Most of my work of working with the platforms has been around my my work in digital literacy. So we've used a lot of the same Truman tools to help teach digital literacy skills to middle school children. It's actually a ginormous project that kind of bore out of some of this work. Called Social Media Test Drive. That's another one you can check out, have your kids play with it. That's a real product, by the way, that we built, and like isn't just research software that kind of sometimes works. It's actually used by tens of thousands of middle school children across the country right now. It's socialmediatestdrive.org if you want to check it out. So we've had some interactions, things with that, but not with much of the research work. A lot of the platforms say, that they care a lot about these type of works and things like that. And not only that, there are a lot of amazing researchers in all these companies that are doing great work. A lot of my friends and colleagues that I know very well are in these organizations or in Facebook and Google and Twitter and things like that. But sadly, I think they've been really disappointed. I think particularly Facebook in general has really not listened or taken to heart the findings of their own researchers inside the organization. You know what I mean? And we've kind of seen time and time again the higher ups not doing anything about it. They honestly just don't care. It's yet to see how a community becomes toxic enough that they lose actual share. You know what I mean? And users and things from it. And that really hasn't taken place too much yet, unfortunately. But hopefully that'll change in the future, or maybe whatever the next whiz Facebook, Google thing, whatever becomes, maybe we'll be more socially aware, or maybe we don't need for-profit social media. Maybe that's kind of the problem in itself. Ethan Zuckerberg, who was at MIT, who's now, where is he now? Where's Ethan? Is he at CMU? I think so. I think he went to CMU. He left MIT because of the whole Epstein thing. His work, he's been really advocating for social media as like a public good, like NPR or like, public utilities or other things like that. What would a public good social media be and stuff like that? If this is where the new town square is, then maybe we should have that organized and controlled by not a company, but by some actual democratic system, So he's been advocating and building and talking a lot about that. So if you're interested in that, his writings on that are really cool and really interesting.
There are a couple of questions from Elizabeth. One was, what were the results of the original study on bystander intervention and making people feel more responsible by eliminating lurking?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the work from that showed that the interaction between our two design interventions, the read receipts and the actual social surveillance or the audience size indicators, together had the strongest effect. So those who had those features were more likely to feel a sense of social surveillance, that they felt like other people were watching them. Those who felt more seen were more likely to feel accountable for what it was that they did on the site. If they felt more accountable, they're more likely to feel responsible for what they saw and did on the site. Accountability and responsibility are different concepts and different constructs. And those who felt more responsible were more likely to actually intervene. All the participants we had in the site for that study, we didn't have liking as an intervention. It was really just flagging. Flagging was the most common one, but only like 25.1% intervened at all. You know what I mean? So just still not very many people intervening. Even though those who felt responsible more likely to intervene, overall, you know what I mean, not that high level of intervention, you know, across these different conditions.
And Christopher Mysick has his hand raised, has for a while.
Hi.
If you want to unmute yourself.
Yeah, I would like to interact with my presenter. So I wasn't here for the social hour, so I guess I'll introduce myself just like recent. So I'm a second-year PhD student at WPI, and currently I'm looking at polarization or political polarization online, and I'm actually planning on using your Truman platform. So it was nice to see the creator of one of the tools I'm going to use speak today. And I was actually starting out and scouting out for ideas, originally interested in looking more at empathy and how you can increase that online. But there are a couple of studies I've come across that say, well, too much empathy is also not a good thing. So like if you have your wish granted and everyone you measure who interacts with your website has their IRI maxed out, is the world a better place? Yes or no, and why?
Yeah. That's interesting. I don't know if it was a better place. I think it's having more empathetic understanding of others. But you're right. Too much of anything can be a bad thing. But you're right. There have been studies of too much empathy, you know what I mean, being debilitating towards other types of interactions. There's reasons why we have limits to it, because it's a strenuous process to feel the emotions of someone else, and to feel those distressing things. And it can be somewhat distressing. There's different constructs of empathy. There's oh God, even in the Bateman study, the original Bateman study from like 97 or something like that. They had this idea of oh God, what was it? It was empathetic concern, and there was another level of empathy about like feeling like you're in that person's shoes, like actually experiencing their emotions, and how that caused distress for other participants and things from that, or could, and trying to find that more sweet spot of it, which is an interesting thing. And I think more it's about not so much trying to get feeling empathy for everyone all the time, because that's, you know, that's just physiologically and neurologically impossible. But it's about in these times of need, you know what I mean, when someone's hurting, when someone is going through some issue, when we see something like that taking place, of be able to drop our guard down enough to feel empathy for that person, to understand what it is, to not just ignore it as just, that's, you know, a cool guy 85, it's probably a bot or not real or whatever, you know, I want to do another quiz feed, whatever thing. You know, it's, you know, stopping for that moment, reflecting on that, and be able to feel empathy for someone and reach out and help them as we wish we would be helped by strangers as well. You know, that kind of good Samaritan effort, and having more of that online. I think a lot of the aggression and other things that we see online is exacerbated by this lack of empathy. You know what I mean? It's easier, we can say and do things to people online that we would never say to their face, or we never say in another context, and things around that. And why, you know, because it's a lot easier. I mean, it's easier to type something mean on your keyboard and call someone an idiot than to say that to their face in front of them, you know what I mean? And see the emotional reaction they might have from that. You know, and then I think by increasing some of that, we can maybe decrease some of the things of this depersonalization that takes place online, be able to reverse elements of that and bring users' humanity and their personhood back into focus, and be able to design around that. I think is more of what we're looking for. But I would, Christopher, definitely reach out to me sometime about your study and about using Truman. I'd be happy to help you or talk through that. We're looking at polarization. And like I said, one of my grad students is working on political radicalization online as well, and some of the studies that were looking through that. So I've helped a bunch of other collaborators and stuff with that. I would love to collaborate and talk and anything with that. That'd be super fun.
Sure thing.
Elizabeth had a second question. Did you want to ask yourself, Elizabeth, or? Maybe not. Okay, so Elizabeth's second question was, MMO games have some techniques for creating smaller social groups, clans, guilds, strike teams. Any thoughts on how to harness these for, e.g. news reading?
Yeah, that's actually really great. That's a really good example, or that's a really good point. In fact, even a lot of the cool levels of, I think like some of the best efforts in empathy and empathetic design has really been by game companies of late. You know, because they've seen what toxic environments on a game can have and how bad those are. You look at, you know, some of the popular games like like League of Legends or Dota or things like that. You know what I mean? And some of the my 9-month-old son is walking around and having a good time. It's nice that he's having fun. You know what I mean? And they've been, you know, kind of accessible for a lot of bad things and stuff like that. But in recent, you know, developments of that, a lot of these games have been really thinking about game design, the emotional effect of game design. You know, I think of like what Blizzard done with Overwatch, and like have the way they design that game, the way it rewards points, the way it celebrates, you know, individuals' contribution as well as group contribution, and having moments and time for that helps encourage different levels of empathetic understanding between your teammates and even those on the other side and stuff like that. In terms of breaking to smaller groups, and from that, I think that's absolutely necessary. I think that there's a lot of great things. I think of like Facebook groups and stuff like that, like literally Facebook groups. There's a lot of interaction in Facebook. Actually takes place on those, on private and public groups around for those, and the moderation policies inside of there. Those can come with their own drama and limits and other things and stuff with that as well, just like the guilds and MMOs and things like that. I also think about like the subreddit analogy, you know what I mean, that Reddit has. It was kind of like the genius killer app of Reddit was this idea of scale of decentralizing and fragmenting their community so that it never got too large, you know what I mean, to be able to mitigate or do these type of things at, like Facebook and others are, you know what I mean? I mean, even when those communities do get too big, you end up seeing them naturally fracture into smaller bits and stuff like that because of some drama or there's that or the other thing. So I think ideas around that of where smaller communities that can create their own social norms, create their moderation techniques, have different strategies for that in line with those community goals, and be able to have more agency in that is a great and powerful thing. But at the same time, that's got to be mitigated by the fact that those can also become really incestuous and bad and problematic and toxic in their own way. You know what I mean? They can spiral out of control, like, you know, the Donald or, other, toxic, Reddit communities and things like that. You know what I mean? So unchecked or with the right moderation strategy for that, they can be bad as well. And so trying to find some mix between, decentralized comment or decentralized moderation between some type of global rules and things around conduct and community standards.
There's a second message question from Mark. If I don't know if you saw it. Do you see it? Self-empathy may be reduced by a system with annoying features. Would a system?
Yes, self-empathy be reduced by a system with annoying features. Could a system that appears to be considerate of the user, let's simplify that, encourage empathy? We are annoying systems because there are things they do, things they could do accomplish. That's a good question. I don't know. That's a great comment. That appears to be considerate of the user. Yeah, I could, it's very possible. You know what I mean? I don't know if it really give you more empathetic concern for others. It could by not ignoring you or giving you more agency or control from those type of things. But I almost feel like that would be more self-reflective, or it's more inward looking and stuff like that. And not so much helping you be more outward reflecting away from yourself into how others are feeling, thinking, and doing around you. But definitely the design of the usability and frustration, other things like that are going to play a big part of that. There's a great study out of Cornell, some colleagues I had at Cornell a few years ago, about like how you could transform other people into trolls. And we really looked at trolling as not just like, not just a personality thing, like some people are born that way or whatever, but like different situations of like anger and annoyance and other type of emotional cues. If you queued up people or primed them for these different emotional reactions, that could have effects on their social relations and their social interactions with others on sites and stuff like that. So that you could actually like prime people for that. If you can prime people for levels of annoyance or anger or things like that, that you can make them more likely to be more troll-like or more mean online because of that. And it had nothing to do with themselves. They might be nice people in other regards and stuff like that, but because of that in the moment response of being mad or annoyed or whatever, they were harmed or made them a little more toxic in their social interactions with others. So I found that was interesting. So absolutely, in that regard, like, yeah, totally. I could totally see that.
I think there might be a couple of questions on the Miro page that were not addressed, unless I missed it, and sorry if I did. So one person asked what you meant by ecologically valid social media in your abstract.
Oh, yeah. So what we're talking about that is when we think about social media research, typically what a lot of these studies have done before were, because they, like me, weren't Mark Zuckerberg or had access to Twitter or things like that, the way you typically do this type of research would be through little screenshot surveys and stuff like that. So you show a couple of screenshots and ask people a bunch of questions about it, or you paint them like a vignette, like imagine you're on Facebook and your friend says something really racist. Would you reprimand them, or would you do this or whatever? You kind of tell them a little story. And those are, I'm not dissing those. Those are great research, a lot of things out of it. But we also know there's a lot of limitations in that type of research as well, in terms from experimental research. And then the things we can actually do with that. We know very intently that there's a clear difference between intentions and actual behavior. I might say that I would stop my friend I would reprimand my friend for saying something racist or something like that. But when I'm actually put in that situation, maybe I'm not. Maybe I'll be more quiet. Maybe I, feel embarrassed or weird or whatever, and I actually don't do anything. You know what I mean? So we know there's what we tend to do and what we actually do can be very different. And those type of studies can't recognize that. Likewise, it's not actually, we know that it's not real. I tell you a vignette, that's not a real thing, unless I ask you like, tell me a time when that did happen, but it's not really going to manipulate other things around that. Or I know it's just a screenshot. I know those aren't real people and other things like that. So what we've tried to do with Truman is try to bridge a bit of that. We try to have this experimental control, this lab-like experimental control to have these type of research and these experiments from that, but do it in a environment that feels real and genuine, that you feel that these situations are real. You don't know that it's fake. You don't know that these aren't real people you're interacting with. You don't know that this situation is contrived and just a simulation. So you're led to believe that this is a real situation on a real platform with real people. And then we measure what your actual behavior was. I'm not just asking you, if you saw cyberbullying, would you do something? I'm putting you in a situation where you think you're seeing real cyberbullying, and I'm watching to see, what did you actually do? Did you actually help out, or did you just scroll on by? And it gives us a little more powerful tools in the type of the work and research that we can do in this that really wasn't available before.
I think you've addressed most of the questions, but if there's anyone that wants to raise their hand, if there's anything that we missed.
I see a couple of things here. The fake bullies. On our site, we did have lots of fake bullies, or actually just one fake bully. It was always Emma. I don't know why that was our bully name. I guess she was just mean. It's kind of like a mean girl. And Cassie was always our sad victim. We had a bunch of other, it's an interesting example of like, there's a certain art to making a good social media simulation that we didn't realize until we started making more and more of these. It reminds me that there's that scene in The Matrix. I don't know if you've ever seen The Matrix, where they talk about how they created like the perfect world in The Matrix originally, and it didn't work because people didn't like it, and they knew it wasn't real, and they would break it down. We found that same thing in our social media simulator. We had our first couple iterations of our simulation was way too nice. Everyone was kind of friendly and other things and stuff like that, and stuff like, it was just people sharing happy photos of their, tacos and burritos and stuff like that. And people didn't believe it was real because it was way too nice and genuine. We had to like make, social media garbage and like introduce that into our system. Like we have, there's a couple, people that act like bots, if you join this link, you can make money at home, buy, this and that or something. We have one person that like always talks bad about like Hillary Clinton and like, Benghazi, whatever, this and that. And weird conspiracy theorist people. And, someone is constantly trying to push like their MLM, and trying to get people to buy into their stupid, doTERRA scent things or whatever. But we had like all the social media garbage we had to replicate and make as well to make our simulation more believable. And so crafting good garbage is surprisingly difficult. And, it's something that we've, been working through the art of that as these studies progress.
All right.
Are rates of cyberbullying increasing or decreasing? That's a really good question. There's no good resource to really find or discover that out. We know that, sadly that, different, antisocial, particularly, racial and segregation-based attacks are on the increase. They have been in the last few years and stuff like that, both in the physical world and in the digital world. And we know that bullying is much more common for women and minorities and people of color online. And the internet and social media that they experience is very different than the social media than I probably experience when I'm on Facebook and Instagram and other things like that. We know that they are significantly much more likely to be the victims of cyberbullying or aggression or other things like that. And that's just really sad. And we still don't have good ways of dealing or stopping or addressing those. There was recently some work coming out of Facebook of some of their changes in their policy about being more sensitive to race language and racist language, stuff like that, or aggression towards people of color than others and stuff like that, and actually privileging that or privileging the moderation of that type of aggression particularly and focusing on that. So that's been nice to see. I actually know one of the researchers who helped design that policy, and actually sadly is no longer actually at Facebook anymore. She actually left just before that came out. But that was one of her big initiatives that she was working on for a while. So it's great to see that, see the light of day, and hopefully that'll have a good effect.
All right, I think that was all I saw. Anyone else have anything? It's getting late, I know.
Okay, well, if you have any other questions or would like to chat or collaborate or play with Truman or anything at all, feel free to email or contact me anytime. I'm always happy to chat with people, to work, to describe any of these things, to talk about anything like that. I'm an open book, so feel free to drop me a line anytime. I'm always happy.
Great. There was one last question.
Oh, great, yeah.
I think. Yeah.
Like having your intervention.
Unless I'm wrong and I just didn't see it before, but.
Oh, I see. Yeah, this is at the bottom. Yeah, overlaid on existing browser, on existing platforms with the browser plugin. You have your thoughts on why that wouldn't work and would be more real than a simulation, but not accessible. So that's a good question. There has been. I actually was thinking of doing something like that a while ago. There has been some research using plugins and things like that. So I could create the interface of these things. What I couldn't do is create the social situations in which these things occur in. You know what I mean? So I could have it actually work on Facebook or work on Twitter for a while at least, but you'd have to like use my plugin and do other things and stuff like that, but which is totally done. There's been a couple experiments that have actually done things exactly like that, or asked people questions or manipulated your environment and stuff like that through a plugin to observe things. So there's great research from that. But my work, the things I'm looking at is so much in those social situations. I want to construct a certain situation, see what you do in it, and have that situation be the exact same thing for everyone. And, kind of play around with that and be able to really see if my intervention was around that. I actually was toying around the idea, and it's something I've been wanting to build for a while. I even have like the way, like I even have it like architected in my head of like how I could do it, of like Truman in the Wild, where it'd be a plugin that wouldn't just change the interface, but would like literally change the responses of like what your friends and family are saying to you. So it would be manipulating those messages to make you think your mom said X, or to think your friend said Y, or whatever. I could actually change that. My reason, I don't think I could get by that with an IRB. I think I don't think I could, and maybe I shouldn't. I probably practically shouldn't get through that with an IRB. That's probably like really crouching some bar, some other things. But I've always imagined like, because that's one of our biggest comments we get all the time is like, oh, okay, this works for strangers, you know what I mean? Or some of the stuff like that, like all these people in Truman are people you don't know, but most of the people on social media, like Facebook and stuff like that, are like your actual friends and family, or people that you might have some relationship with. And like, you're right, absolutely. You know what I mean? Like that's, the vast majority of social media is things like that. It doesn't mean there isn't places where that doesn't happen. I think like the comment section in any news article, or Reddit, or a lot of Twitter, it's kind of stranger to stranger, networks and connections and things like that. So there is a place for that. But we've been thinking about other ways of getting more people involved and things like that as well. We've been thinking about Truman for groups. So like you and maybe a small friend group of you go through Truman together unknowingly. So you and your friends are real, but the people you're interacting around you aren't, you know what I mean? And they're being controlled and manipulated, and seeing like how that changes your relationship and your interactions with each other and other stuff around that. That's one thing we've actually been building and designing for and stuff like that. We've been looking at other mobile platforms and other affordances. So we have a version of Truman that works as Instagram. We're working on one that looks more Reddit-like, and replicates like multiple communities and stuff like that. And we have like a YouTube one that we're looking at right now to get like video feed, stuff like that, and like live streaming and stuff like that. We're looking at like, second screen viewing or other kind of weird stuff like that, and how could we replicate and simulate some of those interactions and stuff. But absolutely. How could you reach me? My address, let me put my, I could put my email address up here in the chat. I am djd@219@lehigh.edu. Or you can also reach me at my first name @ my last name.com. Yes, I own my last name. And all my family has to come to me if they ever wanted like to use an email address with their last name or anything like that. So all the DiFranzos out there, I have like I have a hold on that. I got that for myself. Yeah, happy to take any other questions, comments, concerns, anything else I can reach out with for you guys. Yeah, no, thank you. It's been amazing.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. This was wonderful. And we'll be watching for Truman in the Wild. And
absolutely.
Hopefully not.
You never know. If you're listening to your cousin, if your cousin says something weird, it might have been. You never know. Don't know.
It's good to be forewarned. Thank you so
awesome.
much. This was great.
Yeah. Thank you. Have a great night, guys. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. Thanks everyone for coming.